you have a question, please put it in the chat. We will be monitoring the chat on a regular basis. But we will do Q&A after our presenter today, Don Mackey, goes through the general information. We're also recording this presentation, and everyone that signed up for the webinar will get the actual copy of the recording, and we will also be putting this on our website. I want to give a real quick shout out. We do have our upcoming Market Tech Conference on February 29th here in Kearney at the Eunice Conference Center. Marketing is one of the biggest pitfalls of our small businesses, so I hope a lot of you will come and attend our Market Tech. We have quite a speaker lineup. But with that said, I want to introduce Don Mackey, who will be presenting the information about the Nebraska Small Business Assistance Act project. Don, take it away.
All right, very good. Let me share my screen, folks. You should be seeing that now. And so, as Janelle indicated, I'm going to be giving you an overview of the Nebraska Small Business Assistance Act. There is more detailed information available through the GROW website. And so let's jump in. So a little bit of legislative history. This program was introduced as part of LB 1215 by Senator Suzanne Geis in February of 22. It was amended into LB 450, which was Senator McKinney's priority bill in March, and of LB 450, which addresses development in Omaha. Sections 11 through 16 of LB 450 are the Small Business Assistance Act, in case you want to do a deeper dive. This was passed in April, signed by the governor, and according to the legislation assigned to the Department of Economic Development to implement. The department made the decision to put out a request for proposals for administrators in terms of developing and rolling out this program. GROW Nebraska was selected in partnership with a number of other organizations, including the Center for Rural Affairs, the Nebraska Enterprise Fund, the Nebraska Business Development Center, SourceLink Nebraska, and of course, GROW Nebraska and the GROW Nebraska Women's Business Center. This program has finite funding for the biennium, which has all been now provided to the program. $5 million per year or $10 million for the 2-year or biennium period. The legislation is really rooted in the intent that Senator Geis provided before the Banking, Commerce, and Insurance Committee with the original legislation. There was no floor debate about these sections. And so we have identified what we call our North Star, and that really goes back to the Senator's intent to support lower income and lower wealth Nebraska nascent entrepreneurs and their Nebraska small businesses. So this is focused on small businesses. I'll take you through some of the criteria, and really focused on startup and early stage expansion businesses in the state of Nebraska. Now, to be clear, one can live in northern Kansas, have a business in Red Cloud, Nebraska, and still potentially qualify. But there is a preference for both Nebraska residents, but it has to be a Nebraska-based business. So a little bit about the organization. I've touched on this. DED is the responsible agency. GROW is the contracted entity to develop and implement. And these are the partners that I mentioned before. And so you may have had interaction with Kim and folks at the Center for Rural Affairs or Jim at the Nebraska Enterprise Fund. And these organizations, particularly NEF, Center for Rural Affairs, GROW Nebraska, and the GROW Nebraska Women's Business Center, are actually providing staff and consultants who are working with applicants to help them curate their application and determine what benefits they could qualify for. So keep in mind, let's think about benefits and beneficiaries, and let's start with the benefits. So under the Small Business Assistance Act, there is funding for paying for professional services. For example, If you have an individual who currently is a home-based business, they're operating as a sole proprietor, and they want to create a limited liability company or an LLC, there could be funding to help them work with a CPA or an attorney to do that. There is also grants, and this is unusual. Grants are typically very, very rare for startup businesses. For a startup grant, an individual could qualify for up to $25,000, but also for nascent existing businesses. Now, again, these have to be small businesses with 5 or fewer equivalent employees, not counting the individual or the owner that's applying for the benefits. For existing businesses that are 5 or fewer years in age, in terms of actual revenue activity, they could qualify up to $12,500, and this is specified in the statute. So those are the basic benefits, grants that could be used, and I'll go through some of the applications here in a bit. The other piece that we want is individuals, or are the benefits. In this particular case, the legislation is specific and says it is the individual who is applying for this assistance. So, for example, you could have a business where there are 3 partners, and one of those partners is the individual applying for benefits to support that business. It could be a husband and wife or family business. So again, a single individual applies for benefits specific to their small business. They have to be a for-profit business. They have to be a small business defined as 5 or fewer full-time equivalent employees. For existing business, they have to be nascent, and that is 5 or fewer years of age in operation. There is a preference for Nebraska residents, but as I mentioned, an individual who lives across the border and has a business in one of the Nebraska communities could qualify. It has to be a Nebraska-based business, so there has to be a county and a city or a place where that business is located. Also, these businesses have to be in good standing. So let's say they're a contractor and they do construction work. They have to be in compliance with all federal and state regulations. As an individual, we've had instances where there maybe have been some issues about a criminal past, but they're currently in good stead with the state of Nebraska and the U.S. federal government. And so that's part of the due diligence, is to make sure that these individuals are in good standing with all federal, state, and local laws and regulations. The burden is put on the individual, but the program has the ability through DED to do due diligence to verify that they're in good standing. And there's other criteria, and in time you will discover that there are other factors that are in consideration, and we'll be happy to pick those up through Q&A or subsequent. Now, one of the things I want to share with you is, think about this. This is a $10 million brand new startup. So put it in the context of a business. You don't launch a $10 million startup overnight. It takes time to build systems, to train staff and consultants, to clarify the criteria, and a whole set of things that go with a new startup. So we proposed to the Department of Economic Development, and they agreed that we would do a 3-phase rollout to give us a chance to really fine-tune our systems and our staffing so that we can handle applicants. So phase 1 began in July of 23. This was a soft rollout with the 2 GROW organizations, and they were working with existing clients. And the idea, again, was not to preclude anyone else from accessing benefits, but to really give GROW a chance to really understand what are the questions that are going to come in. For example, one of the things we discovered early on is that our customer relations management software system was not sufficient. And so we went back and spent a great deal of money to purchase an enhanced system, and that is only now coming online. So a very limited number of folks were assisted in phase 1. Phase 2 started on September 26th, and that included clients that were currently with the Nebraska Enterprise Fund and the Center for Rural Affairs. NBDC is a partner in this, but NBDC, because of federal law, can't really curate applicants, but obviously they're working with some of the folks who could qualify. And so they began to identify people that they were working with that could in fact qualify. And a number of those folks have already come into our inquiry system and getting queued up for application. Phase 3, and that's why we're doing this webinar today, is the statewide public rollout on March 1st, 2024. At that point, anyone in the state can begin the application process to be considered for benefits. Now, from a fairness standpoint, the number of individuals and the amount of money spent in phase 1 and phase 2 were targeted and limited. So the vast majority of the resources are still available for those that will come in through the application process beginning March 1st. So as we think about funding for professional services, both new business startups and nascent existing businesses can qualify. There has to be a defined need, such as I want to work with a bookkeeper to actually help me set up my QuickBooks and understand accounts receivable and invoicing and all of that thing. How do I do taxes? There's a number of other criteria, but you'll be able to look at the details on the GROW website. Now, this can include a whole set of services, and this is not inclusive of everything, but you can begin to get a sense that somebody could work with an individual to develop a website, to do their accounting, get their accounting system set up, to do market research. Maybe they want to work with a private concern that could provide business planning or market analysis with respect to revenue projections. And so there's a number of things that can qualify. And in this particular case, individuals can qualify for up to $10,000 in funding for professional services. They have to identify that need, procure a bid or bids that are good for a defined period of time. And at that point in time, the program actually pays the vendor that's providing that professional service. Now, allowable activities for the grants. And so we're trying to track if it's a service that they want paid for, use the professional service funding. But there are things like startup costs, working capital, inventory, franchise fees, fixtures. In a lot of cases, maybe paying 3 months of rent on a building or doing improvements, an enhanced electrical system for that. Now, these funds can be used for employees and contractors, but they cannot be used to pay the individual who is making application for benefits. So that's a restriction. They can qualify for both grants and funding for professional services. And the maximum, theoretically, for a new business would be the up to $25,000 for the grant, $10,000 for professional services, a total of $35,000. For existing, the grant up to $12,500, $10,000 in professional services. You can do the math. $22,500 is the maximum. There are requirements. Just as there would be with a bank loan or an equity investor, in order to receive payment, typically these grants are being dispersed in 2 or 3 payments. 10% is held until everything is accounted for. And in order to secure the second payment or the third payment, they have to account for how that money was spent, any deviations in their budget, so that we have accounting. There is also a requirement in the legislation to determine the impact of this program on Nebraska and its communities. And so individuals, as part of the agreement they signed to receive benefits under either professional services or the grant programs, agrees that they will complete follow-on surveys and interviews to allow the program to determine and comply with the legislature with respect to impacts. Now, a couple of things, and this is where there may be some confusion based on who you've talked to. Clearly, we're not encouraging people to say, oh, you could qualify for 25, so figure out how you want to spend 25. This really needs to be based on the needs that they have at the point in which the individual is applying for benefits. We are also saying there's a preference that the project is shovel ready. And what we mean by that is two things. One is, have they developed a basic functional business plan, particularly identifying markets and doing revenue projections? And are they working with a resource provider? Now, that could be an organization like the Nebraska Business Development Centers. It could be the Center for Rural Affairs. It could be one of your organizations, but it also could be, you know, an individual who has experience and is working with their local economic developer who can help them get this done. But that's going to be really important as we begin to spend down resources, those that are really in a position to make good use of this money in terms of advancing their business dream. Now, a couple of things that apply with this particular criteria is, and this speaks to Senator Geist's desire to help low wealth and low income individuals, the individual income of $55,000 or less. This is for the startup grants. And that would be, if you think about it, AGI, less any deductions, etc., and what taxable income is based on their last year's tax income. Now, this is only for the individual. So if they're filing jointly, then they would have to pull out their information relative to that tax return. There's worksheets that our staff and consultants use to help the individual calculate theirs. There is also a requirement that net worth has to be $200,000 or less. A lot of people have never calculated their net worth. Again, there's worksheets as to how that is computed, but the intent is clear. The senator wants to help people who have limited financial assets, including wealth. Now, this excludes their primary residence. So if they own a home where they're living, that's excluded, but other assets are considered. And depending on where they're at with retirement funds, those can be counted towards current net worth or discounted based on the penalties and tied to their age and the ability to access those funds. There also is a requirement there are no other business ownerships. Now, the rule that DED has worked with us on is that means they have active participation in that other business and they have at least a 51% ownership share. So think about a farm family who may have 650 acres of agricultural land. It's owned by a husband and wife. They own it 50-50. We have flexibility that if the husband or the wife are starting a business, there may be an opportunity there to qualify them for benefits. Because again, in rural and urban areas, this ability to diversify the family's income through business formation can be a real benefit that Senator Geist was encouraging. If we look at the grants for existing business, again, defined needs, shovel ready, 5 or fewer full-time equivalent employees, we've got a calculator so if it's a coffee shop and there's 10 part-time workers, does that add up to a full-time equivalent based on IRS standards? That the senator was clear that she did not want this to benefit high growth or gazelle startups or expansions. And so with existing businesses, if there's a 25% growth rate, now we're right now talking to DED to clarify that this should at least be 2 years of 25% growth. Because again, if it's early and nascent, it would be easy to surpass this threshold. And so that's one that we'll get further clarification from DED on because you could easily meet that threshold and still be meeting the other criteria. The income criteria does not apply with existing business grants, but the current net worth does. Again, no other material business ownership, and there is some other smaller criteria that comes into play. With that, that is my overview, Janelle and Zoe, and hopefully we have some questions, or some questions will come in. I'm going to stop the share and we can go into the Q&A.
Great. Don, we do have the first questions from Ashley, a little off topic, but is there a step-by-step start a Nebraska LLC business step-by-step guide? I do know on the DED's website, they do have something, but is there also something on the Secretary of State's website? I'm just...
You know, I don't know. One of the things that Senator Geist is really encouraging is network locally or in your area. And so, you know, you might want to consider talking to a CPA or an attorney or somebody who has set up an LLC, because these guides are useful and I encourage you to look at them. But I recently reactivated an LLC. I had a CPA, our CPA helped me, and there was a whole bunch of things that I thought I knew that I didn't know. And so I would encourage you, there are some guides, start there. You can get up on the internet and get a guide. But LLC requirements vary from state to state. They have implications with federal tax law. Your best bet is to find a resource in your area that can actually maybe help you.
Great. A question from Kelly. If a business was started in February of 2019, could they apply for both the existing grant of $12,500 and or technical assistance?
Yeah, doing the math quickly, yes. Yeah, you can apply if you qualify for the grant, and in this case, it sounds like an existing business. Yeah, you could also qualify for funding for professional services. And they're two separate applications. So, you know, now they may be the same consultant or staff person may be working with you on both of those. Chances are good that you'll have one person to work with, but they are two separate applications. And our program review committee, which is kind of our loan committee that reviews all of these, would look at these as separate. But obviously, if they're related to your overall effort, that would have merit to say, oh, here's how they're going to use the grant funds and here's how they're going to use the professional services funding.
Great. And the application is pretty simple. So again, they just have to fill it out twice. Wonderful, Don. This is from Pam. So if I intended to apply and my individual income is less than 55,000, but I'm starting a partnership with my husband, do I have to include his income because our combined income would be greater than 55?
The answer is no. Senator Guy set this up as an individual. And so if it's a husband and wife team, or you had two business partners, one or the other can make application, and that way you're not counting the other person's income or current net worth. You're only counting your income and your portion of that net worth. And this is unusual. Typically with programs like this, it's the business applying for assistance. In this case, it is an individual with that business that's applying for benefits under the program.
Great. And from Hallie, if my husband and I start a business that we are technically 50-50 partners in, but he owns his own truck, would we still qualify?
Well, it would be an asset, but again, who was the person's name?
Hallie.
Hallie. So if you were the applicant, we're not counting business assets. And so it would be your income. It sounds like you might be a startup. Your income, your current net worth, the other criteria. And so my sense is it probably would not be a factor in consideration for your qualification for benefits. And again, take everything we say today as we have limited information, so don't take it to the bank. You still will have to go through the application process and it will have to be scrutinized, but it'll give you a sense about some of the nuances of the program.
And then from Troy, if one business was a sole proprietor and now created a new LLC in December of 2024, would they be considered a new or existing?
It all depends on what your, so if you started as a sole proprietor and if you had sales, gross sales of over $20,000 in preceding years, you will probably be classified as only for existing business assistance. If, for example, you were a sole proprietor, you did a little bit of side gig stuff that was maybe $5,000. Now you're really getting serious. You're going to the LLC. You're going to generate more revenues. Then potentially you could be classified as a startup. So that's where the application process is important and the screening is important to actually make a determination. Because we have a lot of folks who, do some side gig stuff. They don't generate a lot of income, a couple of $1,000s a year. And then at some point you decide, I really want to get serious. And based on your revenues of under or over $20,000 in previous years would make a determination.
And then from Monica, where does a person go to apply? Is there a website or a business owner only able to apply via the places indicated in the presentation?
So Janelle, I'm going to let you answer that, but my understanding is come March 1, you will have an application portal on the website. So maybe you can share what's there now and what will be there come March 1st.
Absolutely. So if you go to the grownebraska.org or .com website, on the top navigation, it says NSBAA. There's all kinds of information about what we've talked about today, but there's a pre-app. But again, the actual application won't be available till March 1st, and that will be on that application. And we will be doing, some more announcements and letting people know that the application is up. As Don mentioned earlier in the presentation, we've had to create a CRM and a way to track all these things because this is state money. So we want to do good due diligence with it and really get out there and make sure we're getting it to the people that are in need. But there is a pre-application on there that you can certainly fill out, or you can wait till the official application gets open in March 1st. So just for emphasize the pre-app, it's an inquiry. So if you want to get in the queue and you think I'm serious about this, right now we have 3 remarkable people. These folks have really rich experience in Nebraska, and they are reaching out to anyone who comes into the inquiry portal, which is open now. You can get to it through the GROW website, and you would have a chance to talk to somebody that could further explain to you what you need to do to be ready and whether or not you might qualify. They'll not make a determination. They'll not begin the application process. But if you're serious, you may want to get into that inquiry portal and have one of these 3 wonderful people, Linda, Cheryl, or Star, talk you through this. Great. And then Ashley asks, if your income was over $55,000 last year, but you were laid off and currently unemployed and you start your business, can you qualify to the new business grant? Thanks.
So I assume by last year, we're talking about 2022 or 2023?
She didn't say.
Well, so 2023. So it would be what your most current tax year's filings are. Now, I know we're on the cusp. People are preparing their 23 taxes right now. So if you were above, and we have folks like this, the 55,000 in 2022 based on their tax return, and you're currently preparing your 23 tax return, and you're below that threshold, then you would probably want to utilize your income and deductions, etc. Again, that difference between adjusted gross income I think that's line 7, depending on the tax form you're using, and taxable income for this year. Otherwise, if you're over in 2023, you would have to wait for another tax year to see if you would be under.
Right. From Hallie again, my question was more over the 51% of owning another business, or did I misunderstand that?
Yeah, one of the criteria about having no other business ownership, which is required for both the startup and the existing business grants, is one of the considerations we look at is, are you actively involved in that other business? So use an example. Your spouse has a business. You're not actively involved in that business. Maybe it's a farm, and the other criteria is you would have to have at least a 51% ownership interest to be disqualified. So if its asset is owned, if that business is owned 50-50, there is a potential that you could still qualify for benefits.
From Katie, if an individual is the applicant, does that mean multiple individuals in one LLC can apply?
No. We have, through our program guidelines, determined Senator Geis and the legislature want this money to go to as many individuals across Nebraska. And so one of the things that'll come into play is, we want to get funds into every county that we can. And that's a statutory requirement. And so one of the things we have determined is if it's an individual benefiting XYZ business, yeah, others in that business can't come in and apply. We would preclude that, just out of fairness to give everybody a shot at some assistance.
Great. And then Kelly from the DED did offer that the UNL Law Clinic for legal assistance setting up an LLC, and she gave their email. And then Ashley did ask if that's a free service, and I'm not aware, Don, if that's a free service.
I don't know. But you can get on their website and check and get a sense of what they can do. A lot of the clinics, if there is a fee, it's nominal, but I don't know in this case. And again, one of the things, you guys all know this, ultimately, it's your dream, it's your vision, it's your primary, the one that's going to do most of the hard work. And so doing a little bit of homework, getting connected to resources is something we really encourage you to do. And that means you may have to do some of these things to get ready to be potentially considered for benefits.
Great. If I became a full-time entrepreneur September 2023, but I started my business in November 2019, would I be considered an existing or startup?
It all depends on what your revenues are. And so if you are at 20,000 or more in gross sales in any of those preceding years, you would probably be classified as an existing business. If it was a small side gig, you really weren't, you were still working, you're doing a little bit of work on the side, you're under that financial threshold, then there's the possibility you could be classified as a startup. Because we have a lot of folks that, you kind of do this for a while, you test it, and then you finally say, gosh, I'm going to get really serious. This is going to become the way I make my living. And so we're looking at that pattern, but the $20,000 threshold in gross sales is a pretty strong indicator of whether or not which bucket you might be able to qualify for benefits from.
And then Chris asks, if your 5-year anniversary is March 1st, would you still qualify?
Potentially.
Yes.
Because we did a phased rollout, the program started on March 1st of 2023. We don't want to disadvantage folks that didn't have a pre-existing relationship with one of those 4 organizations. And so in that particular case, we would look at when you became an active business dating back to March 1st of 2023. And so if you're in that window, potentially you could qualify because, again, we don't want to disadvantage you compared to the folks that were parts of phase 1 and 2, which did not include everyone in Nebraska. And
then Ginger's question is there a deadline to apply?
Well, open enrollment, if we use something from healthcare, will begin on March 1st. At that point, you can begin to apply. And, I want to be straight up, and I know Janelle has shared this, is, there is probably going to be more demand for this funding than there is funding, which means depending on when you apply and do you meet the criteria, do you have to go back and do some other stuff to make sure you're qualified? I would guess sometime maybe later in 2024, maybe in early 2025, the biennium appropriation will probably be spent. And so it's to your interest to get informed, get ready, and beginning in March, starting the formal application process. Now, we're a little concerned that we're going to have a surge on March 1st and the site might crash. And so just be prepared. But the sooner you get your application in, but then it's open enrollment from there, and we'll begin to process applications based on how they come in the application queue.
And Don, I think we should probably tell everyone what they can do to get ready, right? Like get a really good business plan that, what you talked about earlier has projections so that, that they can tell us what their needs are. And then to work with a resource provider, which could be a local banker. I mean, this legislation was really clear. We want to make sure everyone knows about the number of rich resources we have in the fine state of Nebraska, correct?
Absolutely. And one of the biggest things you can do, we work with entrepreneurs all over North America, and that is get connected. Talk to people who have experience, build relationships with resource providers. So it doesn't have to be a formal governmental resource or a nonprofit, but maybe there's a veteran business owner in your community who's willing to sit down with you and help you discover it. That's in your interest. Trust me, it will minimize your mistakes and it'll help your glide path to creating or growing a business immensely. So get connected, and also get up on the GROW website and do some homework around the nuances, because again, this is kind of unusual in terms of the standards for benefits and beneficiaries. And so do some homework and get yourself ready.
From Katie, are these awarded on a rolling basis, or is there a deadline for application?
Well, the open enrollment begins March 1st. And we will begin to process from those first in the queue to those that are at the back. Our program review committee meets weekly. They're starting this Friday. We'll be processing 15 applications this Friday. And so the idea is to try to turn this money around based on the volume. That turnaround time may lengthen. Because again, there's only finite resources for staffing to work with applications. So we do beg your patience. The best thing you can do is get informed, get some resources, get prepared, get in the queue. Because folks who everything looks great will probably get moved through the queue faster than those where we're going, oh gosh, there's huge questions about your revenue projections, and we got to go back and do some repair work before we can move this application forward. Because we have a responsibility to the taxpayers of Nebraska. The legislature is providing taxpayer money to pay for this. And the idea is we want to make sure this money is prudently deployed to people where this could make a difference in their dream, make a difference in their community, and hopefully lead to a more successful business over time. So we're trying to strike that balance by being good fiduciaries of the public resources that have been entrusted to this program.
And Kim's question is, can the grant money be used to help pay off a bank loan for a business?
No. And it also can't be used to pay past expenses. So like everything else that you might be familiar with, this will be prospective expenses and that will occur once you sign the agreement. So it can't be used to pay for past expenses. So as you're preparing your budget of what you're asking for, keep in mind that it has to be expenses that you will incur once that budget is approved and you have a signed agreement. We can't pay for previous costs, and we can't pay to repay loans. Now, with that said, if you bring $25,000 into a startup for other needs, and you go back to your banker and say, I now have 25,000 in equity, you might be able to restructure that loan. So again, this is where work with your resource providers, work with your bankers, your lenders, because for a small business, potentially having $25,000 in equity that you don't have to pay back, that's covering other costs, might strengthen your loan situation, and they may consider refinancing you.
Great advice. Can the grant money be used to help costs regarding updates the inside of a building? This person is starting a new business and bought a building, but it needs some updates before it becomes functional.
Yeah. In most cases, those are allowable activities. We're going to want to make sure that you own that building, or if you're leasing it, you have permission to do that. And again, the committee is looking at what kinds of improvements, but potentially, we know in many cases, both in urban neighborhoods and rural communities, you're moving into a building that's maybe been neglected. It needs some upgrades. And again, that becomes a permanent asset in that neighborhood or community. So yeah, those can be allowable activities.
Great. Kelly did report that the UNL Law Clinic is a free service except for any local or state fees that would need to be paid. So thank you, Kelly. And then Alicia, hello, I work with entrepreneurs in Cheyenne County. Yay.
Hi, AJ.
Yay, Alliance. We can all talk about that. So I'm a resource partner for GROW Star. And one of the requirements that can be time consuming for clients, in addition to writing their business plan, is gathering quotes and bids that must accompany the budget form. Can you please briefly explain what is needed for attachments for both grants? And thank you for all that you do. This is a big deal.
Yeah, thanks. Great question, AJ. Yeah, particularly with professional services, in order for us to provide funding, we need a quote from a vendor that you want to work with. Help me, Janelle, how many days does that have to be good for?
Well, we say 90.
Yeah. So
yeah,
because we need time to process, because again, you're buying, and we can advance, but you need to have a detailed quote from that vendor. That vendor has to agree that they're going to give us information so we can give them the funding. They can get 25% upfront, and the balance as the service is provided. And so that becomes an important thing. And again, this is part of your due diligence, is to who do you want to work with, and who are you comfortable working with, and what does that cost? I mean, if you're making a major purchase of a service, or you're going to be buying things through the grant side of the program, you want to make sure that if you can, you have multiple bids. But if there's like an accountant that you definitely have worked with and you want to work with to set up that LLC, that's fine. We're just going to need a quote from them for the services, the amount, and it's good for 90 days.
And also with that, Don, I'd like to add, in some cases, it's hard to get two bids if it's a contractor, and we understand that, as long as they disclose that to us, because obviously we want to keep things moving for these businesses. So Rick has a question. If I understand correctly, the funding was provided for 2 years. Would those funds be 23-24 and 24-25 from July 1st to June 30th?
So it would be for the current, I assume this is Rick from MPVD.
Yep, it's Rick Mills, yeah.
So it's current biennium funding. So DED has the ability to deploy the full 10 million. And so once we spend the first 5 million, we'll right into the second. They have the ability to carry those funds over into the next biennium. They have not made a final decision, but they're actively considering seeking reauthorization of the funding, but also probably some amendments to the legislation. But that's a decision the DED will have to make with the governor and the sponsors of this legislation. But we're working with current biennium funding.
And Jenny has a good question. New business activity in a new markets was started in spring of 2020, but market tested under an existing LLC formed in 2015. Revenues for the new market/business idea were under 7,000 per year. How could I still qualify?
Well, I think as we get into some of these more nuanced situations, get your information organized. When the application portal opens up, get in, and then we can assign somebody to work with you to actually do a fine-tooth review of whether it sounds to me that potentially this could qualify as a new business, but I don't want to be definitive until somebody looks at all of your information, but it's a possibility.
And then Judy asks, will the first 5 million be available in the first year and then the second 5 million be paid until the next year, or will there be possibilities that all 10 million could be committed in the first year?
Well, it's possible that we could go through the full appropriation in 2024. I mean, given the amount of demand, the rate of inquiries, it's very, very likely that we could go through the full appropriation by the end of calendar year 2024.
Well, and Don, I think we also want to make sure everyone understands that not all 10 million has been allocated for grant funding, because there's
That's
some
correct.
infiltration, and the DED, the state required them to hold back some. So we're going to try to, give out over 50% of that into grants and more, but there is, costs associated, right?
Exactly. And again, we GROW Nebraska files a quarterly report that accounts for, based on the statutory requirements of how the program is rolling out. And those reports are public documents, and so you can obtain those through DED or through GROW Nebraska.
And Tracy asks, what time will the site open for applications on March 1st? I would say, I don't know, in the morning, don't you think, Don? I mean,
I don't have an answer for that.
Yeah.
And again, don't think of this as a land rush. I mean, I think we will have a surge in applications. But if you get in later that week, chances are you're going to have a shot at assistance. And so I appreciate the question, because if you're trying to get a good seat on Southwest Airlines, you want to get there right at the moment they open up those selections. So I get it, but that'll probably, as we get closer, Janelle, that'll be on the website. Again,
Absolutely.
It's important for you to periodically check that website for new information, updates, that type of thing. I would really encourage you to just, if you're serious about this, make a point to check in with that website periodically to see if anything has changed, because that'll be your go-to information resource. Some of this is on the DED website, but the GROW website for the program is your most complete resource that you want to check.
And then Melissa has a question. Could my business buy one of the family vehicles for the business with the grant money?
Don't we have precedent on that, Janelle?
We do. That's Melissa, I'm going to be honest. In certain cases, we are doing part of a vehicle, but the DED has recommended that we sort of stay away from that, just because it's hard to say what's being used for business versus personal. So that would be something, Melissa, we'd like you to work with a frontline staff person, and we'd have to make a precedent, but they are trying to stay away from vehicle purchases in most cases. But would you agree with that, Don? I mean,
I would agree with that. Yeah, there are potential perceptional issues. Again, not going to say absolutely no, but
Right.
if you've got other things you need to do, that might be desirable.
And then the next question was, do you have any recommendation to where someone can write a business plan or at least review it for free or low cost? I've tried to have my business plan reviewed by NBDC, emailed them on November 22, no response. Seems like it's easier to self-fund VS being approved for the grant. I've worked with different resources, no luck. I will give the application a try.
So there is software on the website to do a business plan. I think the important thing is think about people you know in your area that have had experience with this. Because the important thing about a business plan is not the technical chapters that are in it, but have you really thought about what are your markets and how could that translate to revenues? And so, if you've got an uncle or an aunt that's been in business, that may be the resource to say, sit down with them and talk this through. Does this make sense? Or maybe your local economic developer, or, so there are formal resources, but again, they all have heavy demand for their services. So the important thing is, are you building a network of people you can sit down and run things by that have relevant experience? That could be a retired business owner in your community that you respect who's willing. I mean, I think of, not that he does this for everyone, but I think of all the people that Robert Stoll in Ord has sat down and helped them talk through, or Jim Jenkins. Some of you may know him from his days with Skeeter Barnes. Jim was always willing to sit down with people and talk it through and say, man, this doesn't quite make sense. So the important thing is, have you thought this through, and has somebody helped you think it through, versus all the technicalities of what could go? Because we can see a 100-page business plan that is worthless. We could see 3 pages that are well thought out, clear market, clear revenues. Okay, that's valuable. So this is in your interest, because ultimately this is going to have more impact on you than anyone else. Find some people that you trust that have experience, use them as a resource, because it's not a technicality. It's just important that you have thought that through. And it's important that if you have thought it through, we're going to be in a better position to be a prudent steward of the public funds that have been entrusted with the program.
And on the website, Don, as you mentioned, we do have a 3-page business plan that was actually came off Forbes.com, and we did run it by a banker from Pinnacle, Adams Bank and Trust, First National, and they all thought it was right on point. And as Judy brings up in the chat, obviously Nebraska Enterprise Fund will review business plan for free, and so will the Center of Rural Affairs. And so there's, like Don mentioned, there's lots of resources out there, but we have a template on the website that's really efficient that answers a lot of those questions. Troy's question is, I did an orientation with GROW Nebraska, but how do I know I'm assigned to a mentor, or who should I contact? I'm not sure who the orientation, Troy. I'm probably just going to have you reach out to me to find out what kind of orientation you did, because he might have had a call from, one of either Linda or Cheryl or Star what. So, Troy, I'm going to have you reach out to me, and my contact information will be at the end so that we can figure out what you're meaning by orientation and get you to what you need. So great. And thank you, Judy, for the resource. And that's all of our questions, Don.
Well, folks, I hope this is helpful. Trust me, everybody is doing their level best and more to try to make sure this really benefits what Senator Geist was hoping for, and that is to help Nebraskans pursue their dreams, build businesses that impact the communities where they live. And so we will try to work with you. There are peculiarities about this law that you go, man, I'm 3,000 above the 55 and I don't qualify. That's not fair. Guidelines are guidelines, and there's certain areas where we simply have no flexibility. We have to honor what the law has told us to do. So your patience and understanding, your counsel, is welcome. Become a partner in this effort to support entrepreneurial business development in our state.
Great. Well, again, I want to thank everyone for attending, and I want to thank Don for taking his valuable time today and sharing with us. I also want to stress that the money does go to an individual, but you must have a business checking account, and the money's ACH'd, and you will, this is taxable, any grant that money you receive, you will receive a 1099. So again, we just want to make sure that we're keeping everything yeah, available to all the questions you might have. So again, thank you, Don, and we will share my information. If you have additional questions, please reach out.
Good.
Have a great afternoon. Bye-bye.